I just want things the way they were.
Yeah. We're
Which
so
is
used to
probably,
it.
yeah, it's probably kind of a good analogy for St. Louis City, actually. I kind of just like things the way they used to be.
Right.
Oh, well, we're not mathematically eliminated.
Oh, come on.
I mean, how much how
I
much
know.
hope do you want to how much hope do you want to have here?
I I don't have any, to be
Or do
honest.
you want to go with what Cedric Toykert said? Because I've got or Toyshirt. I've got Toyshirt's quote.
I saw that. Yeah, I read it earlier this morning, and then I saw you put
Hmm.
it on the notes.
You have to, right? Like that's
Yeah,
that to me is it. Like we'll say it later during the show, but that to me is
yeah,
it.
yeah. Even if you win 5 in a row, we're probably gonna lose the tiebreaker with most of the teams. If it comes to that, somebody 43 points tied with City for 9.
Hmm.
City won't have enough wins.
Yeah,
I look at specifically at Minnesota, and they already have 11. City will have only 10.
it's today's the day to start reframing really all of the expectations.
Yeah.
Kind of change it all on what you're looking for. Good morning to everybody who's joined us. Thanks for. I mean, this is true sicko behavior. Like we make that's the like staying up MLS after dark, following all the different podcasts, diving into the stats. Like if you can bring yourself to watch our stream, not just us, but like to watch a City stream or something talking about City after losing 3-1 and playoff hopes being essentially daggered at 8:15 the next morning, like God bless you. Credit to you. We thank you so much for joining us because true sicko behavior, and we love every minute of it.
Yeah, thanks for everybody who is with us today. But
Kind
yeah,
of kind of feels like tonight.
it's
Barely
not a
feels like we slept.
it's not a great morning.
No, not from a St. Louis City perspective, that's for sure. You ready to get this going?
Let's do it.
You know, we're doing this so early that the stats that we usually talk about with the passing network and the average height of defensive action stuff hasn't even been calculated yet.
Yeah, I was looking for that, and there were some for other games, and then I saw a post that said rest will be up tomorrow.
Yeah,
So
basically right at our game's cutoff.
right.
But if I were to guess, I would bet that our average height of defensive actions would be surprisingly high. I thought we had a pretty good press, but we'll talk about that.
Yeah,
All right, you ready?
let's do it.
Welcome in everyone to Flyover Footy. My name is Matt Baker, joined as always by my friend in soccer, Santiago Beltran, for another fallout, and not a great fallout at this time, looking at a 3-1 loss by St. Louis City to Minnesota United at City Park this weekend. It was a great game for about 5 minutes. And Santi, you were on the call. How are you doing this day after we're recording? And just big picture thoughts here.
Yeah, no, doing great. Obviously, after a loss that basically shattered any playoff hopes the team had. It's just tough, especially after that great start. You score within the first 5 minutes, and things were looking good. But Minnesota did also a good job staying in the game and creating opportunities. And in the end, St. Louis couldn't created chances, but couldn't capitalize. And Minnesota did a better job at that. But yeah, not great, not great. It's not a great feeling. I think last year was a great season, and even though this season didn't start great, like there were always hopes, and the team showed good things in League's Cup, and it looked like maybe things were going to turn around. But just losing that 6 point game to Minnesota, a direct opponent, I think that was the dagger on City's hopes.
Yeah, let's just dive right into it. Starting 11, Santi, wasn't really a surprise. I mean, there was one surprise, but mostly it was consistent from what we'd been seeing, for better or for worse. I think the consistency was actually part of the surprise here. You had more or less a 4-2-3-1, but you could argue that it was a 4-2-2-2. I guess the fluidity of the attack, which we'll talk about in a minute, is one of the things that you can really point to. Roman Berkey in net, obviously, but it starts off Jake Nerwinski back there, right back. Henry Kessler, Kyle Hebert, center backs, Giannis Horn, again there in the left back spot. Chris Dirk and Edu Leuven were our central midfielders. Simon Betcher, Cedric Teuchert, Marcel Hartl, and Klaus were our attackers. I don't know what formation you want to really list that as, if it matters, but I saw Klaus and Betcher together for the first time. I saw Klaus with his first start since June 22nd. Jake Nerwinski and Giannis Horn, both with their third consecutive starts. And different expectations, different really reactions to both of those, because Giannis Horn, we expected him to come in and hit the ground running, get some of these starts and take this spot by and large. But Jake Nerwinski, has he cemented this right back spot? What's going on here with Jake getting his third start?
Yeah, I have no idea. So my initial thought after the Galaxy game, I was like, yeah, he has to get another start because he did a great job. He earned it.
Mm-hmm.
And Thomas Totland had played a lot of minutes. But then yesterday, to be honest, I thought Thomas Totland was going to be back to the starting lineup. But
Mm-hmm.
then third start for Jake Nerwinski, and he had some good moments, and he participated on the first goal. But yeah, it's hard to know what's going on with that right back position. Thomas Totland, a young guy that was brought this season, and had done a great job. But now it looks like for now that's Jake's job, unless now the team knowing what's left and that playoff hopes are very little, maybe the team will start taking a look at some of the guys that maybe haven't had a lot of minutes and look at different formations, combinations. But yeah, I was surprised by Jake start, and Betcher. I was kind of, maybe will happen, maybe not. The one thing that was deceiving was Hakwar on the press conference talk about the possibility of them playing together, but he was referring more to late in the game.
Mm-hmm.
If you need a goal, I need to go for it. But seeing it from the start, it was a good surprise.
Yeah, and I saw Jake, and the first thing that came to mind wasn't, is Thomas Totland in the doghouse? Has he done something to lose his spot? My first thought was that Hackworth had talked a few weeks ago and pretty regularly about these positional battles. Remember, a couple weeks ago, he mentioned 4 spots that were being battled out for who was going to start, and we obviously knew right back was one of those spots. So I don't think, to me, this is something that says Jake has this right back spot and it's his to go for the rest of the season. I still think that he needs to be earning that spot both in training and what he's doing on the field. But the first thought was this was a strategic approach. Totland and Nerwinski have vastly different styles. Nerwinski is a better single-minded defensive player. He doesn't press high into that right wing type area, overlapping with the right mid or with a central mid like Teuchert is. He's more stay along. He presses a little higher than the center backs, like our fullbacks do, but there's a point that he goes, and he doesn't really go much further than that. I thought the near assist that he had to Teuchert's goal there at 5 minutes, pretty good example of the height that Jake usually goes to. He'll stay wide, but he's got a defined role. You know, he's not fluid in his two-way, quote unquote, modern fullback type approach. And so I've seen the struggles that we've had defensively for now a period of time. And I think Jake, to me, was the response to that. You bring in Nerwinski, he can deliver some service high like he showed last night, but at the same time, he provides a pretty clear defensive-minded help. And that, to me, was the biggest thing. So combination of that, maybe strategery, right? But also just how he can help and showing that he's won the spot more or less in training. So he's proven what he needs to do in training. That battle's continuing. We know it is. I don't think there's any question that Thomas Totland is still in contention. But those two things together, the fight they have in training, showing results on the field like the Galaxy result. And Jake didn't have really a bad game here. I don't think he did anything wrong. He had a good cross, like I mentioned at the beginning of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So this is going to be a story that we watch. There's a few stories, even given the fact that the playoffs are pretty much out of reach now. A few stories to watch that can really inform what goes on in the offseason because Jake's contract is up. You know, he's got an option that St. Louis could pick up, but that's a storyline. Has he done enough to earn that, and what would that mean for the future? And then on the other side, Giannis Horn, I think this game in particular showed the value that St. Louis has in Giannis Horn with his flexibility, not just at left back, but also able to slide in at center back, which, let's just get it out of the way early. Giannis Horn has experience at center back. Remember when we were first hearing the rumors about Giannis Horn, looking into where he'd been playing, noticing that his recent past had been by and large at center back, and that he can play that role if need be. This showed that flexibility for better or for worse, given the results. But these are the kinds of conversations I think we need to start having as we look to the rest of the season and what our goals are.
Yeah, I'm very curious about seeing the passing network to see how high Jake was, and yeah, obviously he didn't have any fault on any goals, but the the second goal from Minnesota, it was a play where he was pressing too
Mm-hmm.
high. So I'm interested about seeing his position. And Minnesota, I think they recognized that he was high, and they kind of held the ball, and Rosales like went around to like let his teammates make the move, and then he had that long pass. I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but I'm interested in seeing his average positioning, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens the rest of the season with him, his contract situation. He's a great leader for the team, and maybe the team will value that and will pick up that option.
That's another aspect. I'm glad you brought that up, because Jake Nerwinski as a leader being on the field does fill a bit of a gap that maybe Tim Parker left when he went to New England. We had talked about who, and kind of positing who's going to pick up that slack when it comes to the leadership council of players, so to speak, that we had. And we know it used to be Josh Yarrow, Tim Parker, Edu Leuven, Roman Berkey, those kinds of players. Nothing's changed with Yarrow's being on the team, but with Tim Parker leaving, you need to have that kind of a player on the field that you can trust to have this kind of leadership role. And you wonder if Jake Nerwinski, that's another notch in his belt for earning this time. I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever know those answers, but you just have to kind of look to the examples you have. So stats, Santi, if we look overall to this game, this felt like Minnesota dictated their style a lot better than St. Louis dictating our style. Overall possession numbers ended up 58% to St. Louis, which is not what we want to be doing. The XG battle was won by Minnesota, even baking in the PK. Minnesota still would have been on top. Total shots, St. Louis was outshot again, so we didn't have the volume, and especially in the second half, we didn't have the quality on our shots. Minnesota had 18 shots to our 15, and they had 9 shots on target to our 8. Of all the numbers, there's 2 sets of numbers, the passing numbers and the duel numbers, that I think really tell the story for this game. The duels were good. St. Louis won all of the duel battles. 57% overall duels won, 58% on the ground, 52 in the air. Great job winning these 50-50s. Great job putting themselves in good positions when they had the opportunity. The passes, this was one of those eye-opening things that have only happened less than a handful of times for St. Louis, where they had 500 plus total attempted passes. 351 from Minnesota, so there's a huge stark difference in the number of passes, and that is not how St. Louis typically approaches games. 422 of those passes were accurate from St. Louis, only 278 accurate passes from Minnesota, but you could see from the eye test what that meant, how Minnesota was able to use their speed, use their creativity to make more of their passes than St. Louis. And the reason that these passes are important is because a whole lot from St. Louis was on the back line. It was in our own defensive half, trying to figure out how they wanted to approach things. And at one point, it cost us big, trying to use too many passes, trying to be too get in your own heads about what you want to do with the ball. Talking specifically about Edu Leuven on that one. Before we get into the goals and the game flow, any thoughts on these numbers or just the overall way that St. Louis approached this game? And do you feel like this was effectively dictated by Minnesota?
Yeah, the number of passes definitely. I thought it was gonna be higher than usual, but 500 plus. When I think about it, it's what you said, like a lot of passes in the back from side to side. Minnesota did a good job not opening spaces for City. They at times they were basically sitting back, and sometimes they chose to press, and that's how they created the first goal. But I think they were also patient, and St. Louis just couldn't find the spaces, and it'll be like I'm probably it's probably half of those passes were in the back line, if I
Mm-hmm.
had to guess. But yeah, no, City just couldn't open spaces and create chances, especially on the second half. I was watching the highlights this morning, and I there wasn't a city chance until Nuke Vitorizon came in, and the game was already 3-1.
Yeah, let's start it off at the beginning on the actual good part. So let's rewind a little bit from all the doom and gloom and talk about how St. Louis did effectively come out in front on this one and open things with high pace, high quality, and they really dictated what they wanted to do from the get-go, even if they couldn't sustain it. So this was a really quality play. A long ball on the play prior led into this. It was headed by Minnesota, leading to Klaus winning the ball at midfield, just in this kind of winning the aerial duel battle that we had talked about. So around 4 minutes or so, Klaus wins the ball with the aerial duel from Minnesota, playing it back. This is where you see that beginning from the very get-go, St. Louis being more prone to possessing the ball and being intentional with it, as opposed to winning the ball and immediately trying to force things. Klaus wins the ball. They don't find anything up front. They play it all the way back to their back line, getting it to the entirety of the back line, kind of cycling through it. It eventually gets over to Jake Nerwinski on the right side, just in front of the center backs on that line, and quickly sending it long. So they reset, get it to Nerwinski. He sends it long to Betcher and Klaus. Betcher wins it more or less. He at least controls it long enough to play it off to Cedric Teuchert, who then right behind Betcher with two guys on top of him, ball falls to Cedric Teuchert, who then immediately recovers it. And this is the quickness that Teuchert shows, is he doesn't need to take any time to do anything with the ball. Ball fell to him and immediately shot it. Great pace, great quality on the shot, put St. Louis up 1-0. The combination of the way that the goal was scored and what led into it, I think was really, in hindsight, foreshadowing things to come.
Yeah, it was a promising start, scoring early. Something City did a lot last year, and that's how they were able to open games up. But Minnesota, after the goal, they created most of the chances, and for portions of the game of that first half, Minnesota dominated. City created some chances too, but I think Minnesota, for long periods of the half, was the better team.
Yeah, they absolutely were. And if you look at the shot map on where the shots came from and what time they came from, you can really paint a picture that the eye test passes. And it was dictated after that mostly by Minnesota. And even like what I was trying to get to with the shot from Teuchert is the lead up to that in St. Louis's more, I wouldn't say hesitancy, but just their lack of pushing, lack of pressing the ball when they had it, led to some things that we were about to see happen. So like in 20 minutes, for instance, there was a close Minnesota chance. Jake Nerwinski this was if you look at what happened here at 20 versus later on with Jay Reed, there's a stark contrast to what was going on here. Both opportunities Minnesota had really close to goal, and both were just on a hairline on what occurred. At 20, thankfully, Jake Nerwinski got a toe tip that touched it barely to Roman Berkey, and Michael Boxall had a yellow card because he ran into it, but there was a bang-bang play that Nerwinski was just able to prevent the ball from being put in a very dangerous spot. Unfortunately, it was just a few minutes later at 24 where Michael Boxall finally got his. St. Louis was in possession on this in their own half. Edu Leuven, this was really frustrating, Santi, because this is what I was alluding to earlier. Edu Leuven had the ball, and I think St. Louis was playing it back amongst themselves, playing it on the back line, trying to figure out what to do with it. Leuven took just a little bit too long to figure out what he wanted to do with this ball, and it was a timing issue more than anything, I think. It wasn't anything, it was a bad touch by Leuven necessarily. He just took too much time, and Bonkole Hongwane was able to just take the ball. And that was the end of it for Leuven. Is Bongo read it very easily when Leuven had the ball. Leuven, I think, telegraphed what he was doing. If you watch what he did, he was looking up, looking high, kind of took a step back just real quick, gave too much space, and Bongo was able to take it. So St. Louis being in possession, doing too much with the ball, overthinking it a little bit. Leuven loses it to Bongo. Bongo then plays it over to their new DP, Clevin Yeboah, and Yeboah shoots it. He doesn't actually try to do too much. He just takes a prospective shot from outside the box. Not too dangerous in and of itself, but the entire time this is happening, you got to watch where Bongo is. He's not just creating the turnover, but he's consistently moving. He's kind of underlapping that entire run that Yeboah has, ends up on the opposite post, and is able to effectively find that rebound to put it back in, getting in behind Kyle Hebert. So Bongo putting that ball home on the rebound the way that he did, I think is a failure in two ways from St. Louis. It's a failure on turning the ball over from Leuven, which was just an egregious turnover from a guy that you really don't expect to be making that kind of a mistake. You expect Leuven to have a little bit more awareness, more so than anybody else on the field, knowing what he needs to be doing, and especially the propensity St. Louis had to play the ball back. They weren't forcing things at that point. And so for Leuven to attempt this was kind of mind-boggling, but then also the transition defense. St. Louis had numbers, but the positioning of Bongo to move from their right to left so quickly seemed to really take St. Louis by surprise, more or less. They weren't necessarily ball watching, but they were watching the player who had the ball in Yeboah, and they weren't paying attention to who was coming on far post over there. I thought that this was a really disappointing goal to allow for St. Louis.
Yeah, yeah. After a turnover, obviously Lewin took too long, but also Long Wane, he kept running after the turnover and found he was in the right position at the right time, but he made a great run, and St. Louis wasn't aware of it. The one thing I wanted to ask you: do you think Jevoa's shot was strong enough for Roman Berkey to give that rebound?
To keep it, I don't. No, I don't think it was an overly challenging shot. It didn't have enough pace that you could say, well, this is definitely a shot Berkey wouldn't have been able to grab. I thought, and there were players in the mid, so you never know what kind of angle he had on the vision,
Hmm.
how he saw the ball. But the pace that I saw, not just live, but on the replays, I figured Berkey could have grabbed that. But that's one of those. I'm not going to bemoan Roman Berkey for not grabbing this. I know he's the highest caliber keeper in the league, but at the
Hmm.
same time, that's not something that I would put on Berkey. He did his job in stopping the shot. It was our back line that didn't do the job in clearing the ball.
Yeah, and definitely not on him. Like the play started due to a turnover, and you're right.
Yeah.
Maybe he had an obstructed view, and all he could do was try to clear it. But in the end, Long Wane was in the right position, and that changed the game. Even though City created some chances during that first half after the tie.
Yeah, it was a back and forth match. I mean, there weren't very many overly challenging opportunities from either team. And so it was 1-1. And then in going into stoppage right before, St. Louis did have a couple pretty good chances. In fact, two of their best three, statistically speaking, chances occurred at 42 and 43 when Klaus wins a high press turnover, gets the ball quickly to Betcher, who, as the announcers say, scuffed it. And the
Mm.
ball fell to Dane St. Clair, the Minnesota keeper, very harmlessly. That and the Thorson shot in the second half might have been the most frustrating things for me, because that was a clear opportunity that Simon Betcher had. And Klaus, man, Klaus, you have to say all credit in the world. This and other times that he was doing to go win the ball, his pressing, his 1v1s. I thought Klaus did a fantastic job. And this was an opportunity you saw where Klaus can create, and he didn't need to worry about being the one who was not just creating, but also looking to finish as well. And then at 43, he did have his chance to finish. He won the ball back again, and he was played through by Cedric Teuchert, who Klaus wins the ball near midfield, keeps running, plays the ball to Teuchert, passes him up. Teuchert gets a nice through ball in, but the timing just wasn't there. The space wasn't there. Klaus was kind of sandwiched between Dane St. Clair and Jefferson Diaz, their right back. Couldn't get a true shot off. And those were kind of it. As you go into half, you had these two really good opportunities. And so that could potentially give you all of the kind of momentum you need to go into it. But then you have the Chris Durkin injury. You have the issue with Chris Durkin right before half, where he goes to plant on his right foot, sends a crossover with his left, goes down, goes off for a couple minutes because medical staff had to come on. So that's the new MLS rule. You go off for 2 minutes when the staff comes on to treat a non-head injury. He came back on, so that was encouraging to see that Durkin returned to the game. You thought, okay, this is going to be great. And then you start the second half in quite possibly the worst way possible with two subs. So all of that stuff in the first half, I thought the attack was okay. It was showing signs. You know, you had things to build off of. It was very fluid. We mentioned all four of the attackers were kind of all over the place, doing what they need to do, just maintaining overall consistency in where they were covering, but they were able to kind of work together to know where each person was. So they weren't clogging space. Hartle was coming in, Teuscher was going out, Betcher was going up top, Klaus was coming underneath, and everybody was working well together. The overall effectiveness of it, though, was lacking. And so you thought you have things to build off of. This is clearly a team that is struggling to break Minnesota down, needing to be a little more direct, a little more quick with their pace. But 1-1 at half, you had no idea that coming out of half, though, you'd be seeing the subs that we ended up seeing.
Yeah, I was thinking Dorkin maybe wasn't going to continue, but then seeing Henry Kessler out, that was a red flag for me. And then Janis Horn moving to center back. You mentioned he had played there before, but my understanding was he was more like when he was with three in the back, not with a four-man back line.
Right.
And I think really made a difference not having Dorkin. It's a big loss, and Henry Kessler has been doing great things too in the games he has played.
And so we have JGR, Jake Girdwood-Wright, come in for Chris Durkin, central defensive midfield. We have Jay Reed come in for Henry Kessler. And so the back line shifts to left to right, Jay Reed, Giannis Horn, Kyle Hebert, Jake Nerwinski. And then you have Leuven and JGR at that double pivot. And we've seen JGR a lot at central defensive midfield. It seems like he came to us from Sydney FC. I just want to really quickly point out Girdwood-Wright came to us growing up playing defensive midfielder. He was transitioned to a center back just last season. So this is his home position, and I think we're seeing the need for him to play here more so than the need for center back. I don't know that speaks to long-term planning for JGR, but getting a prolonged look at him, I was excited to see. And I thought he did a fine job. I didn't see anything wrong with his positioning. I think he stayed deeper than what Chris Durkin often does, which is helpful to our back line as well. But yeah, it's Giannis Horn moving to that left center back, Kyle Hebert moving to right center back, and just the interplay between them. A lot on the day after, a lot in the aftermath is focusing on Horn and Hebert. Hebert's inability to really, it seems, pass the ball over to the left side, get the ball into positions that I think some people see might have been open or given a different option to. I think getting into the minutia of things, but it is a concern when you have that as your back line. And hopefully it isn't your permanent back line for the next 5 games and Kessler's able to come back. But right now, Giannis Horn and Kyle Hebert may be the next men up on that center back line. It both didn't have a lot of excitement to it, but it didn't really do anything to harm us. The time that we had a 4-man back line, we were stretched. And I don't necessarily think if you look at the shape itself, so if we set up in our defensive shape, that's not the issues that occurred with this back line. We're going to get into in just a second how the goals were really forced, but I think there's a difference between that 4-man back line setting up shape and Minnesota having the ball at their keeper versus that 4-man back line and how they worked together and tried to handle their own press. So while their team was pressing where they needed to cover positions, but also how they handled transition. And that's, to me, the spacing and the communication with that specific back line, that was the issue. And it didn't take long for it to really present itself, 52 minutes, which led to the own goal. This started by a Minnesota goal kick played to Joseph Rosales, who himself was newly subbed on at half, the left back. So he was subbed on, pressured high by Jake Nerwinski. So Minnesota's left back, our right back. Nerwinski was very high on this play. I think this is probably what you were alluding to earlier.
Yes.
Nerwinski was in the attacking third, I would say, for City. So Nerwinski was very high, giving good pressure, but the pressure left open space on the touchline. Rosales was able to use that touchline to send the ball really high, finding Yeboah, who recovered it nicely in Minnesota's attacking half. And at that point, you have Yeboah on Minnesota's left, St. Louis's right, and he's 1v1 with Giannis Horn. Giannis Horn, our left center back, is going 1v1 with Kelvin Yeboah on St. Louis's right side. Not just the right side, but the far right wing. That's how far out he was being pulled. Yeboah just handled Horn in that 1v1. Horn had an attempted tackle, which just exacerbated the issue. Yeboah was able to get the outside track, move on past the tackle, and basically go 40 yards out individually, dribbling that ball to the goal line. After Horn missed the slide tackle, he had Edu Leuven step up near the goal line, you had Kyle Hebert and Jay Reed being pulled closer to goal, Jay Reed coming back, tracking all the way in front of goal. And as a last-ditch effort, when Yeboah passed the ball into the front of the net, it was Jay Reed who tried to slide in front of it, clear it, and ended up getting the worst possible touch, the exact juxtaposition from Nerwinski's touch in the first half to put that ball top bin and give Minnesota the lead.
Yeah, that was definitely the play I was referring to. Obviously, the press didn't work and left a lot of space. When you press so high, that can happen. But the fact that Janis Horn was on the right side, I think shows a little bit of maybe the lack of familiarity between him and Kyle Heaver. I know it's easy to think about this the next day, but when you were
Yeah.
talking about Jake Irwood Wright, I was thinking, well, could he have been an option at center back? And instead of putting Janis Horn as center back, you keep him as left back, or he's the one that is sub out for Jaden Reed. But yeah, it's obviously you can think a lot of things the next day when the game is over. But yeah, I think that play show the lack of cohesion for this new backline.
An interesting tactical conversation there. The tactical change itself came after the third Minnesota goal, so let's get into that real quick. This was the obvious PK from Yeboah, but it was really all worked by the Kyle Hebert handball. The corner play before at 62 minutes was a handball called on Kyle Hebert, and it wasn't called until after the sequence after this one. So the corner happened, the play happened, the call for handball was going on by Minnesota. The announcers, when I was watching the replay, were basically mentioning the entire time how they looked down and they saw that the replay assistants were looking at the video. And then the play ended, or the sequence ended afterwards, and they went back and looked at it. Kyle Hebert, in fact, had his arm raised during his jump trying to block the Minnesota header, and the ball went from the head of Minnesota down to the arm of Hebert where it was deflected, and so it was a PK call. Yeboah then converts the penalty, and suddenly, 62 minutes in, you have St. Louis down by 2 at home.
Yeah, and at that point, like, yeah, still 30 minutes left, maybe more with the stoppage, but a draw I don't think will have been enough. So you
No,
think
agreed.
you have to score 3 goals to win the game, and basically because a draw leaves you in the same position, 8 points behind Minnesota. Minnesota a game in hand, so a win was really needed. But there was still time. It's just that what developed during that time, like City. Only until Thor came in, created some chances, but Minnesota did a good job keeping shape and not giving too many spaces to City.
And then right after this goal is where the really tactical substitutions start occurring, and the big pull, I think, or push from John Hackworth to go all in. This to me was Hackworth saying, we can't play for the draw. We need as many attackers on the field. We have to play for the win. Not sacrificing the defense, but really limiting them, because you're looking at the substitution that occurs when Alm comes in from Nerwinski at 63, changes the shape to a back three, a very clear back three. You can't argue it was a back five in the slightest. This was a very clear back three. Jaden Reed, Janis Horn, Kyle Hebert. If you look at the overall shape that occurred the rest of this game, you had Marcel Hartl and Rasmus Alm as wide attacking wingers, not even mids. They were wide as wide can be for periods of time. You had JGR and Edu Leuven as more of a double pivot, working the midfield back and forth. And you had Cedric Teuchert, Simon Betcher, and Klaus up top near the mid. You're putting a lot of attacking firepower up front. I saw it at times as a 3-2-4-1 of sorts, but that attacking group was so fluid. You had Alm and Hartl mostly on the wings, but everybody else was really fluid up top. But they didn't produce a whole lot at that point. I think they were trying to find their shape, trying to find their spacing, figuring out how to progress the ball. That was another issue that I think St. Louis had, is how do you progress the ball effectively against what Minnesota was showing you? And they couldn't break through. Whether you blame certain things like, where's Marcel Hartl best suited? Is it out wide on the left wing, or is it more central? Do you need to leverage his capabilities with the ball and let Leuven connect with him a little bit more? That's something I wish I would have seen more, because Edu Leuven himself didn't do a whole lot in progressing the ball into effective, dangerous areas. There just wasn't much cohesiveness, wasn't much connection. And yeah, you could say that Minnesota didn't give you anything, but if you're going to be a quality team and fight for a playoff spot, then you have to be able to dictate something against the ninth place team in the league. And that's really where we saw the big difference to me is quality, resiliency, the ability to fight back and get the ball into some of these spots. It didn't happen at that time immediately with the sub change, but it did happen later on. And before I get too ahead of that, you got to mention the 70th minute almost penalty call on Klaus. From your perspective, so 70, 68 minutes or so in, Klaus goes down right outside the box or right in the box, depending on your perspective. What did you see there? Do you think this should have been a penalty called based on where Klaus went down?
I think it was very close. I look at the replay a few times, and maybe he was on the line, but it's also possible he was just outside the line when the contact happened. It was a very close play. Maybe that could, if City would have gotten that call, game is 3-2, and you still have 20 plus minutes to score a couple more goals and keep your postseason hopes alive. But just the bar hasn't been great to City lately.
Not at all. The 77th minute saw Nukvi Thorson come in for Simon Betcher. And then it also saw at 78 the best statistical shot of the game for City. 0.53 XG on one single shot, which for St. Louis City is basically unheard of in the run of play. Nukvi Thorson received a ball in transition from Cedric Toyshirt across on the turf from the right side, and Thorson was just a hair behind it to where his slide couldn't get any kind of a touch on it. The expected goal on target was pretty abysmal, even though the expected goal was really high. Good positioning, fantastic pass from Toyshirt. Couldn't connect with Thorson. Thorson also had another shot opportunity later on in the game. But once this happened at 78, I think we were done. I didn't see a St. Louis City side that really felt any sense of urgency and creation in what they were doing. Mark Stock in our chat, the hustle was really off, I think, at the very end of the game. I didn't see a lot of desire. I saw the word resiliency being tossed around on social media. St. Louis couldn't break down what they needed to do effectively. And you could credit Minnesota, for playing good defense towards the end of the game, knowing they needed to protect their lead. But I don't think we got the ball into the hands or onto the feet of our difference makers enough. Marcel Hartl, I mentioned it earlier. I wanted to see more from him with the ball. I thought he did fantastic off the ball and what he was doing. He's never shown me anything but the biggest desire since he joined the team and his commitment to pressing and running and hustling for 90 plus minutes. Cedric Toyshirt, I thought, also had maybe his best single game in a City jersey. But cumulatively, it doesn't start with the attack. It starts with the ball in the back line at the midfield with Roman Berkey. You have to be able to get the ball into the possession of those players. And whether it was the fact that we were just a possession-based team last night, we didn't really seem like we stood a chance there in our ability to get the ball. The second half, for instance, we had 10 total shots. I mentioned that shot from Nukvi Thorson had 0.53 XG. 9 shots otherwise, 0.3 XG total. That's not going to win you a game. That's old school St. Louis City from earlier this season where you have volume but zero quality behind it. Minnesota wasn't overly better than that. They didn't dominate us by any stretch of the imagination, so I don't want to make it seem like we were outgunned this entire time. Their PK in the second half was 0.8 of a total 1.57 XG. So they didn't have very many quality chances either, but I don't think they really needed to or intended to. They didn't have the drive or sense of urgency to create like St. Louis needed to do. We weren't able to get over that hump.
Yeah, even Minnesota, I think a draw will have been okay for them, but they were able to break the tie early in the second half, and from there they just managed the game, knowing that City was the one that had to show some sense of urgency. And I'm with you. Like after that chance at 78, I think not exactly sure what happened, but I just saw like players, and it could be the way Minnesota was defending, but just not a lot of good movements. City had the ball, but nobody was moving to find a space or to get the ball in a impossible clear space for someone else. And could be Minnesota, but yeah, I know there was a lot of disappointment about those last 15-20 minutes.
Man of the match for this game was Cedric Teuchert. He had a goal, his third of the season. Now has 3 goals and 1 assist through 5 MLS games. He was the FOTMob player of the game. If you look on that app, he had an 8.3 player rating, 0.33 expected goals, 0.72 expected assists, mainly off of that Nukvi Thorson attempt. 4 chances created, 2 big chances, 5 total shots, and he had 2 successful dribbles, 2 tackles won, and 2 crosses in. Overall, I reiterate, Cedric Teuchert, best game he's had so far, and he's had some good games. But the problem with this one to me is that he didn't have other players in the attack have this same quality of a game. Klaus had a good game, I thought, but he didn't have a good game in the sense of finishing goals. He had a good game in everything else, all of his
Yeah.
underneath work. 5 chances created from Klaus, 6 touches in the box, duels won in excess, and quality duels won. The goal that we had was a duel won by Klaus to retain possession. Rasmus Alm, sneaky good game, very sneaky. In relief, he had 6 of 6 duels won. So he didn't do a whole lot to help the attack in the sense of goal scoring, but it was the underneath work. It was retaining possession, keeping the ball, those things that you need players to do. But I guess that we're speaking, it's kind of double speak, right? It's saying players had good games underneath, trying to win balls back, keep balls, but you didn't have anybody have a good game in facilitating actual goal scoring. Edu Leuven didn't have a good game in my eyes. 2 of
Yeah.
8 ground duels won. He led the team in touches, so the ball was being moved through him and he was winning the ball. You take away that, even if you take away that one mistake that he had in the first half, like giving the ball up to Bongo and how that goal was scored, I still think Edu Leuven was lacking. And the connectivity between lines starts and ends with Edu Leuven. So how effective, it's almost like, so as Leuven goes, so goes City in their ability to create chances. An off night, it seems, from him that really permeated through the chance creation otherwise. Any other players you want to shout out for what you saw, good or bad?
Just back to Cedric Teuchart. Obviously, third MLS game, but he also scored 2 in Leagues Cup,
Yep.
which makes it 5 in all competitions. And now he's tied with Joao Klaus as the leading goal scorer if you count all competitions.
Oof, that's a stat for you. I mean, it speaks to the recent increase in quality in the attack. When you have a team that's on the razor's edge like we've been, though, you can't have a game like this. This is a game where you have to this is what we talked about a few weeks ago, right? If you're going to make this kind of run, you have to have that high level nonstop. You cannot let up. And I think it's even more disappointing to me that this happened at home. I
Mm-hmm.
thought that the crowd was electric. I thought that the energy was great. It was old school St. Louis City. It was everything that we come to think of home matches at City Park. And the team wasn't able to rise to the occasion on this one. I think that Minnesota continues to be a team that, for one reason or another, we struggle at. They're now the second time that they've beaten us at home, which is concerning, first and foremost. Next year is going to be an interesting time when they come to City Park. But and it wasn't the exact same. They didn't park the bus. They didn't have a low block necessarily. This new team under Eric Ramsey did what we thought they would do. They came out in more of a mid block. They showed signs of pressing, like you mentioned earlier, but they just had individual talent. Yeboah and Pereira, their new designated players, really shined. And this is a battle. We knew it was going to be a battle between the new signings from St. Louis and the new signings from Minnesota, but you also have all those other players that lead into it. You have Hongwane, who is the one who initiated that, the goal from Minnesota. Guys who have been existing on the teams, doing what they need to do to facilitate for the new guys. Didn't see that as much for St. Louis. So St. Louis has a lot of questions. St. Louis has questions on the back line that continue to persist. The midfield, you have injury concerns now with Chris Durkin. John Hackworth really didn't seem like he had any answers post-game on Chris Durkin, specifically saying that he don't know exactly what's going on with Chris, but it is concerning. Hackworth's comments on Chris Durkin said he felt his knee early in the half, continued to feel it, and then when he played that long diagonal, he felt like he felt something again. So Durkin needed to get out, obviously, but this is something to follow into the week on what's the report for Chris Durkin. And then Henry Kessler, not a long-term concern, but a very short-term, medium-term concern because Kessler left the game taking a knock, going through concussion protocol, and then going back into the game after, and then returning to concussion protocol. That was concerning to hear. So we're going to have to watch Henry Kessler's updates very closely to understand how he's going to be going into the San Jose game next week. That would create a cascade effect for our back line. And then the conversation, Santi, becomes, what do we look to for the rest of the season? What do we look to for the San Jose game? What's your mindset going into these last 5 games?
Well, end the season on a good note. Try to put together a few wins in a row. Hopefully, a win on the 28th against the Sporting KC. So you can also put a dagger on their playoff hopes. But yeah, I think just trying to continue showing that game that has been really good for the team the last few games. It wasn't great last night, but there is something to continue working on and building. But yeah, I think you start also thinking about 2025. You mentioned Chris Durkin. I think the team will be careful with him, especially knowing that playoff chances are almost inexistent. Why risk a player that has been so good for you to a long-term injury when there is nothing on the line? So we'll probably get some of the guys who haven't had a lot of minutes. Maybe we'll see more JGR.
Yes.
Some of the guys who haven't really had a good look, they will get that look now.
I think that to me is potentially the number one thing that I want to see more of in these last 5 games. Now, we're not mathematically eliminated, have to really specify that. So that will play into probably Hackworth's expectations and how he manages this. So if there's a chance, then there may be a fighting chance from City. So I don't know that I look for so many changes next week against San Jose, but if and when we are mathematically eliminated, that is one thing that I want to see. I'd like to see it next week. Take your rest if you need to with Chris Durkin. Make sure he's right. If there was one thing that I can guarantee right now, it's that John Hackworth at this moment in time is not going to press a player into playing when there are potential injury concerns. Remember the issue with Joachim Nilsson. That is this ever-loving thing in Hackworth's mind, that he remembers what happened. He remembered that Nilsson was supposedly 100%, played on turf, re-injured himself. He's not going to push Durkin if Durkin doesn't pass every single medical check and is completely good to go. JGR is the next guy up. Central defensive midfield, center back, doesn't matter. We haven't seen him start. We haven't seen him get a huge run of form out. This could be the opportunity. And in the last 4 or 5 games, depending on what happens after San Jose, I would love to see more JGR and try to figure out your back line. So there could be changes. There will be changes that happen in the offseason. But this back line is the biggest question mark that you have today, and it's been that way since the loss of Tim Parker, the trade of Tim Parker, rather. Henry Kessler has worked to gel. He's kind of taken that Tim Parker spot, but the players playing off of him have been fluid. You've had Kyle Hebert step in for Joachim Nilsson. You've had Jonas Horn step up in that left back spot. Right back is still fluid, so figure it out. Whether you have to try and mix and match different players, whether you want to try and say, this is our back 4, we're going to give them a run and see if they can do it, kind of put up or shut up mentality. I want to see something attempted on our back line. I want to see something figured out. And I want to have more hope about our back line going into the offseason the way that I currently do about our attack.
Yeah. At least start thinking about next year and some guys that their contracts are up or that have options. Also, you have to start thinking about that. And I know the team did a lot of movement during the transfer window, but I think you also have to start thinking about what you're gonna do for the beginning of the 2025 season. You see this in MLS every year. Teams keep improving and bringing either young DPs or U22 initially players or DPs, and I think City will need to look at that, see who they can bring for next year. There is a good structure right now, but
Oh, yeah.
I think adding a couple more pieces will help for 2025.
We'll deep dive that and a lot more on Flyer Footy later this week and throughout the rest of the season. I'll leave us with Cedric Toyshirt's comments post-game, which get to the heart of what we were talking about. Toyshirt says, quote, "It was a really bad day for us, but we have to keep going. Have to work hard every day. And I think we have to work hard every day for next season. But today was a really hard day." And so that frames it. Hackworth was a little later getting into his press conference after the game. There was no doubt there was some hard feelings in the locker room. Not a despondent necessarily group, but just a frustrated group and a disappointed group in themselves. And so we leave this game still tied for 12th at the current moment with SKC. They play on Sunday evening against Seattle, so we'll see how that plays out. But St. Louis is now 11 points out of ninth place, where Minnesota sits. We have 5 wins, 11 losses, and 13 draws. We're in no danger of dropping into last. San Jose has already been eliminated from the playoffs mathematically, but every team above us has a game in hand. So we have to be realistic about the rest of the season and where we currently sit, even while we still have some optimism in not just the rest of the season and how they're going to play and how the players are going to work together, but long term, like Santi said, keep this in mind. Lutz built this roster from this transfer window with the long term in mind. There was the obvious short term goal of make the playoffs, but the way he brought players in, the contracts that he signed them to, 2025, 2026, into 2028 for some players, this is a long term plan. So the core that we have now is the core that we're going to build off of, not just for the rest of the season, but into next year, even while we tinker and make a signing or two here and there, figure out where that hole and increased quality can be found. Let's see what these guys have to offer. Let's continue to tinker with where we play Marcel Hartl, for instance. Maybe give him a different look in where you play him. Maybe move Cedric Toyshirt up. Try some different things is a good way I'd like to see the rest of the season approach while you're figuring out what you need to do on places like the back line. Any last words before we go, Santi?
No, a disappointing night. Hopefully, the team will bounce back against San Jose in the battle of last place team against the team just right above them. That's a game you have to win, and yeah, I know mathematically still possible, but win that game and see what happens. But start also thinking about next season and hopefully we'll see JGR getting more minutes.
That's right. That's right. It's all about the next game up at this point. Long-term plans are just put them aside for right now. Enjoy the ride for the rest of the season. Hope we see our players improve, continuing to gel, and showing us what we wanted to see coming out of the transfer window. That's it for us on Flyover Footy. Thanks for joining us on this fallout, looking at the 3-1 loss against Minnesota United. We'll be back later this week for more content, more City talk. Thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for joining us. For Santiago Beltran, my name is Matt Baker, and we'll talk to you later.
Vamos, City!
All right, Santi. We're out. Thanks, everybody, for joining us on the stream. Appreciate it. Have a great Sunday. We'll talk to you later.